Tried to get rid of me in a foreign city? We got rid of you. Instead, context. Back in 2011, me and my immediate family traveled to Saudi Arabia for Umrah, or what's known as the Lesser Pilgrimage. You visit Makkah, make rounds around the Kaaba, pray with all your heart and soul. You get the picture. My dad and I were excited because we were all about going on a spiritual journey and casting away the problems of the world. But as it turns out, some problems just wouldn't leave us. As soon as we landed in Jeddah's airport, our plan was to take a taxi to Makkah and get the Umrah done while we were still gung-ho about God. However, we were instead diverted to our relative's house in Jeddah, where we discovered that 4 or 5 of my mother's relatives and their families had gathered up and spontaneously crashed in my grandfather's house for one giant family reunion. Naturally, my dad and I, as well as my maternal grandfather, were really upset over this development, as my mom's side of the family is full of, for the lack of a more polite word, the shady folks. Most of them I was on good terms with, but once I realized that my least favorite uncle and aunt had come with the crew, my enthusiasm just deflated like a balloon. For a quick comparison, Uncle Zubair and Aunt Rubina were the Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia of the family to me. They'd spoil their own kids rotten, be as stingy as they could with me before getting noticed. And oh, did they love to take advantage of the fact that I couldn't speak Urdu at all when I was younger. They talked smack about me and made fun of me for all sorts of things, and when my mother brought it up, they simply waved it off as me misunderstanding whatever they said in Urdu, and my mother trusted them. Sure, I couldn't speak the language well when I was 8, but I could damn well understand a lot of what they were saying, and just going through all of that really made me intensely dislike them. Back to 2011, the entire rodeo of relatives comes up with a great plan. Let's go complete our Umrah trip as a group of 23 people. It'll be a great time. Me and my father reluctantly agree to this, and before we head to Makkah, my father makes a little contingency plan for the rare occasion me or my siblings get lost. My mother shares it with the group, and everyone thinks it's a good idea. If someone gets lost, we all return to, that is, X floor of the clock tower building and wait for the rest to come. No problems, right? We go to Makkah, we have dinner in the clock tower hotel, and as I'm getting napkins to clean up after the food, the men split up and abruptly leave for the Kaaba. The ladies already had left, and Aunt Rubina still at the table, waiting on the napkins. When I ask her where all the men went, she smiles and points in the wrong direction, and also tells me twice that our contingency plan got changed, and we were to meet on Y floor if we got lost, instead of the original contingency plan. Had I been older, I would have noticed something was very wrong with her words, but I was 15 years old and fearful of being left behind, and so I ran off without even doubting her. The result of her misleading me amounted to 1 hour of checking out the entire hotel, looking for my father and the men, then heading out to the Kaaba and spending 3 hours circling the Kaaba, distracted and heavily disturbed by the fact that I couldn't find them anywhere, and then heading back to the new contingency plan's location and crying myself to sleep on a rusty chair because none of the guards understood me, and I honestly thought I was lost for good. A couple hours later, my father finds me, and he gets violently mad at me for ditching the group and going to the wrong floor, but he realizes something's up as soon as I tell him what Aunt Rubina told me. The men quickly arrive and hug me out, and when Uncle Zubair hugs me, he grins and asks me, "Did you feel the despair?" Before laughing it off as I take the next minute to process this man's words. The entire group of 23s just trying to talk to me and see the positives out of the situation on the car ride back. But the whole time, I just have one thought on my mind. Did my uncle and aunt really just try to intentionally mislead me and lose me in a large city overseas? I later tell my parents the whole story. My father's a little bit unsettled, and the rest of the trip continues with my parents keeping a close eye on me. Revenge. Back in 2015, we visited the homeland and met up with all these bozos who were excited to see my mom's American family. And just as expected, Uncle Zubair and Aunt Rubina are in the mix. I decided not to say anything about what happened 4 years prior, and I make my mom promise not to say anything about the incident, as she loves to reminisce things. About an hour into the trip, I realized that my uncle and aunt still think I have the same language comprehension I had when I was 8 years old. Amazing how they think stupid. But in 2015, I was finally able to speak and understand Urdu fluently, but I wasn't just going to tell them that. With that, I decided that I'd snoop around. and maybe sit through their shit again with a recorder and show my mom that I was right all along about them lying to my mom that they weren't shit-talking me. But this is where things get interesting. Uncle Zubair takes me along with his son as we visit a couple different apartment and houses he has the keys for and help him clean out the houses. My neighbors are out on vacation, and they asked if I could help clean up for them. He tells me in his broken English, but I really doubt him between how fervently he's scouring the entire place and how he's indiscriminately throwing their belongings in giant trash bags and large rubber containers. Belongings of neighbors that apparently trusted him enough to leave their spare keys with him as they stayed with relatives in America or elsewhere for the summer. It was weird and shady AF. I'd never seen anything like this back in the States, but I connected the dots when on another day, Uncle Zubair's son called me from one of the said apartments and asked me if I could walk over there and pick him up. Turns out the house was almost entirely empty of anything the neighbors owned, and my cousin already set a bunch of his own stuff in there and had the gall to tell me, "Papa said this is my apartment now." What a riot. My uncle was robbing people of their apartments and houses when they were on vacation. A week later of some unnoticed eavesdropping, and I learned that Aunt Rubina and my other cousin are doing this same dirty work in the state, province right next to ours. They had better English and told me that they were going to the other state to help my cousin study, and I was just nodding if off. Yeah, go study your lying ass off, as if I didn't hear you at all 24 hours ago talking about cleaning house preparations. We're having dinner later that night with Uncle Zubair and a few other family members, and when there's a lull in the conversation, he just asks me, "Son, what's your favorite part of the summer so far?" And I just smiled and replied in Urdu, "I love the real estate work you've been doing. Could you help me get a property as well?" His face just drains the moment he realizes I knew the shit he's been pulling, and everyone at the table starts asking questions because my uncle is the last guy to talk to about house-related matters. They prompt me for more information, and I just spill what his son said. "Papa said this is my apartment now." And what type of bullshit he and his wife were doing 5 towns over. And the next thing I know, I'm taking my dinner plate back to my room as the drilling commences in the dining room. As my family and the rest of the extended relatives finds out, he's been clearing out apartments of neighbors who went overseas for the entire summer, maybe 10 or so such flats and little houses, and hauling their possession to a storage unit somewhere only God knows. The controversy gets really big. A couple homeowners get alerted and chase Aunt Rubina and my cousin out of other town. And it's not long before my parents told me that our entire family pretty much disowned my uncle and aunt's family for pulling this immoral bullshit when being trusted with people's keys. In the end, I never was able to stick him with the "Did you feel despair?" line he hit me with back in 2011, but man, am I glad I won't have to deal with their shit again.